Imagine sitting quietly at a family brunch, sipping coffee, thinking maybe, just maybe, today would be different. Then your mother smiles at you with that sweet sharpness she's perfected and says, "We're just trying to be nice, including you. Don't think you matter." That was the moment I knew I had never truly belonged. But I also knew this would be the last time I let anyone treat me like I was just a placeholder in my own family. What happened after that shook every single one of them. Before I begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you have ever felt like the outsider in your own family, please hit that subscribe button. Because this one is for you. My name is Elena Morgan. I am 32 years old. And this is the story of how my mother made it clear I was never meant to matter, and how I finally decided that I did. From the outside, we were the picture of wealth and closeness. The Morgans were respected, admired, even envied. We lived in a colonial-style home with painted shutters and seasonal wreaths on the door. My mother, Grace Morgan, was always perfectly dressed, always ready with a smile and a biting compliment disguised as charm. My father, Benjamin, had that sort of old-school businessman energy, stern, quiet, but always showing up when it made him look good. And my siblings? Let us just say, they were her favorites before they could even spell their own names. Ethan, my older brother by 5 years, was a golden boy from birth. Captain of everything, full scholarship to Yale, and now a neurosurgeon married to an Instagram-famous interior designer. If Ethan sneezed, my mother would declare it was brilliant. Charlotte, my younger sister, was born dazzling. She had our mother's ambition and my father's cunning, all wrapped in a polished legal career and a sharp tongue that could cut through steel. She always had the last word, the biggest laugh, the seat at the center of every dinner. And me? I was the middle one, the quiet one. The one who handled the paperwork, remembered birthdays, sent thank you cards, and tracked everyone's investments without ever getting a single thank you. I managed high-net-worth portfolios for a Boston firm that catered to generational wealth. Quiet work. Serious work. Work that kept clients' legacies intact. But in my family's eyes, because it did not come with viral headlines or press mentions, it was invisible. Still, I showed up every time they needed me. When Ethan forgot to file his taxes, I called in favors to fix it. When Charlotte needed investment advice for a friend's startup, I spent nights researching while she sipped wine and called me a lifesaver. When my parents were weighing whether to sell one of their Martha's Vineyard properties, I ran the comparative market analysis and explained the tax implications like a pro. But appreciation? Recognition? Not once. And still, I came to brunch. Every first Sunday of the month. Without fail. It was practically a performance. Charcuterie boards, fresh squeezed juices, antique china, and a chance for my mother to parade her children like purebred show dogs. On that particular Sunday, I arrived with warm pastries from a tiny artisanal bakery tucked away in the city, a place I had discovered after a long client meeting that left me drained. The owner always wrapped everything with hand-tied twine and dried lavender. I thought the presentation might please my mother. I was wrong. As I laid the box down on the counter, I heard her voice from across the room, light and clear, dripping with faux delight. "Oh, look who remembered we exist." Laughter trickled from the others. I smiled politely. "Good morning, Mom. These are from Levine's downtown. The citrus scones are their specialty." She barely glanced at them. How quaint. We sat. The table was cluttered with dishes and conversation. Ethan was talking about some new surgical tool he was presenting at a conference in Switzerland. Charlotte was bragging about winning a settlement before the case even went to trial. I was quietly sipping my coffee, just trying to stay present. That is when my mother turned toward me. She tilted her head in that way she does when she is about to deliver something cruel in the tone of kindness. "You know, Elena," she said, drawing out the syllables like a song, "we're just trying to be nice, including you." The table went quiet. I blinked. She smiled. "Don't think you matter. I mean, this brunch is really more about keeping the family close. Not everyone has something to contribute." My Uncle Philip, seated beside her, barked out a laugh. I sat still, cup in hand, pulse silent. My father cleared his throat, looking down at his eggs like they were the most fascinating thing in the world. Charlotte raised her eyebrows and reached for another croissant. Ethan chuckled under his breath. Not a single person said a word in my defense. I stared at her for a moment, really looked at her. The woman who gave birth to me, who styled my hair before school recitals, who used to tuck notes in my lunchbox, notes I later learned were written by the nanny. And then I did something I had never done before. I stood up. There was no rage, no drama, no slammed doors, just a calm, deliberate movement as I pushed back my chair, picked up my purse and said, "Thank you for the clarity, Mom." She blinked. What? I was never sure before. But now I know. You really do not see me. She frowned. Oh, come on, Elena. Do not be dramatic. But I was already walking out. As I stepped into the spring air, my heart was not heavy. It was light, because for the first time, I saw everything clearly.
I was not part of that family system.
I was their safety net, their footnote, their nice inclusion. And I was done being grateful for crumbs. I drove home in silence, no music playing, just the hum of the road and the quiet certainty that something inside me had shifted. Not broken, shifted. Like a door had finally clicked shut behind me, and I did not want to open it again. That evening, I poured a glass of wine, sat on my balcony, and looked out over the city skyline. My phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. "You left brunch kind of suddenly. Everything okay?" I deleted it without replying. Then I opened my laptop. And I started to write a letter, one that would mark the beginning of my new chapter. Because if they thought I didn't matter, they were about to learn how wrong they were. The letter I started drafting that night was never meant to be mailed, not at first. It began as therapy, a place to pour everything I had swallowed for the last decade. The moments I was passed over, the holidays I spent working behind the scenes, the times I was told to stay quiet so my siblings could shine. A digital exorcism of every invisible wound I had learned to smile through. But the more I wrote, the more I realized something. It was not just about what they said at brunch. It was about a lifetime of being the extra. I had been the middle child in every way imaginable. Always between Ethan's brilliance and Charlotte's charisma. Always the helper, never the headline. And for years, I accepted that role because I thought that was what love looked like. Sacrifice, silence, service. Until the brunch. Until my own mother looked me in the eye and said, I did not matter. That night, after finishing the letter, I saved it in a folder labeled for me. Then I sat back and asked myself, what now? The answer came softly but clearly. I was done making myself small. Done chasing their approval. And definitely done attending brunches that felt more like performance reviews than family gatherings. So I started with small actions that no one noticed, but that mattered to me. I unsubscribed from the family group chat. I muted Charlotte's constant updates on social media. I declined the next mandatory wine night Grace tried to plan, citing a work conflict. I expected pushback, but no one called to ask where I was. No one followed up. And somehow, that hurt more than if they had fought me on it. They simply let me go.
Just like that.
But while they were forgetting me, I was remembering myself. I went back to therapy, something I had quietly stopped when my mother said it was a waste of money for someone who had nothing to be sad about. I reconnected with old friends, people who had known me before I got buried in family obligation. I even said yes to a speaking engagement at a women's finance summit in New York, something I would have turned down a year ago because Mom might think it's bragging. The summit changed everything. I stood on a stage in front of 200 women and spoke about what it meant to manage the wealth of others while never being seen as valuable yourself. I told the story, not with names but with raw truth, about being invisible in the one place that should have made me feel safe. When I walked off that stage, I received the first standing ovation of my life. That night, as I sat in the hotel room with a glass of water and aching feet, I opened my email. Dozens of messages had poured in, women thanking me for my honesty. Professionals asking for interviews. One even said, your story reminded me that I deserve to take up space too. And I realized something startling. I was being seen. Truly seen. Not for my connections. Not for my family name. But for me. 2 weeks later, an opportunity landed in my lap that I would have never imagined. A boutique financial firm in San Francisco reached out. They had seen the summit recording. They wanted to bring me on not just as an advisor, but as a partner. They offered relocation, equity, full creative freedom, and a blank canvas to help shape their next generation strategy. I stared at the offer for a full hour before calling my therapist. "Is this running away?" I asked. She paused thoughtfully, then said, "Or is it finally running toward something?" I accepted the offer. I gave my notice at my current job, quietly packed my apartment, and signed a lease on a sunlit studio near the bay. And then, the week before my move, I sent one final group email to my family. The subject line was simple: new chapter. The body read, "Dear family,
I wanted you to hear it from me.
I have accepted a new position in San Francisco. I'll be moving at the end of the week. I wish you all the best. Elena." That was it. No drama. No details. No asking for permission. I waited to see who would reply. My father sent back a dry, one-sentence message. "Best of luck with the move." Charlotte left it on read. Ethan responded 4 days later with a thumbs-up emoji. And Grace? My mother? Radio silence. She did not call. She did not text. She did not even ask why. But deep down I knew why. Because if she acknowledged my decision, she would have to admit that I had a life outside her orbit. And Grace Morgan did not do humility. Moving day came quietly. Just me, a few boxes, and a plane ticket. I sat on that flight with a weird blend of sorrow and thrill in my chest. I was leaving behind everything I had known, and everything that never really knew me. When I landed in San Francisco, I felt like I could finally breathe. My new apartment was small but full of light. My new firm was sharp, female-led, and collaborative in a way I had only dreamed of. I was finally in rooms where my voice carried weight, where I was not the one they invited to be nice. And then, about a month into my new life, I got a message that stopped me cold. It was from my mother. 3 words. "Are you happy?" I stared at the screen. It wasn't a jab. It wasn't coded in sarcasm. Just a single, vulnerable question. And I realized maybe this time she was the one being quiet. I typed my response slowly.
Yes.
For the first time in a long time, yes. No reply came after that. But I did not need one. Because for the first time, I was no longer waiting to be seen. I had seen myself, and that was enough. 3 months into my new life in San Francisco, I was no longer checking my phone for family messages. That silence, once heavy, now felt like freedom. I had built a rhythm: morning runs by the bay, a warm croissant from the cafe downstairs, days filled with meaningful meetings and creative strategies. At night, I curled up on my tiny but sun-drenched couch with a glass of red wine and books I had never made time to read before. My life was simple.
Full. Mine.
But as anyone who has lived long enough knows, peace is rarely permanent when you come from a family that only calls when things are falling apart. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I had just wrapped up a workshop on financial wellness for first-generation entrepreneurs when my phone lit up. Charlotte, 2 missed calls. Then, Ethan, 1 missed call. Then, Mom, calling. I stared at the screen. 3 months. Not a single word. And now, suddenly, all 3 reaching out within minutes? I let the call ring out and placed the phone face down. But the knot in my stomach tightened. That night, just past 11, I got a text from Charlotte. "I know you're mad, but something happened. Call me." I did not reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and typed a few words into the search bar. Benjamin Morgan, Real Estate, Connecticut. There it was. A front-page article from a regional business journal. Morgan Properties under investigation for fraudulent valuations. My father's name was right there in bold. I scrolled quickly, scanning phrases that made my breath catch. Overstated market value. Fake appraisals to boost investor confidence. Anonymous whistleblower, facing criminal and civil charges. Suddenly, I understood the calls. The text. The long silence broken. They were not reaching out to apologize. They were reaching out because the walls were caving in. I closed the laptop and went to bed with 1,000 thoughts clawing at my mind, but none louder than this one. They're only coming to me because they need something. And I was right. The next morning, I woke up to a voicemail. It was my mother's voice. Soft, strained, too sweet. Hi, Elena. I hope you're doing well. I know things were tense before you left, but something's come up and your father, well, we could use your insight. Financially. Just some guidance. Nothing too involved. Please call me. I stared out the window, watching the early fog dissolve into sunlight. There was a time when that voicemail would have lit a fire in me, made me rush to help, to fix, to prove my worth.
But now?
Now I felt still. Not angry. Not bitter. Just done. Later that day, Sabrina, my colleague and new closest friend, noticed I was quieter than usual. She gently nudged. Family stuff. I nodded. The kind that only calls when the house is on fire.
She didn't pry.
She just said, "You don't owe anyone your peace. Especially not the ones who tried to convince you it wasn't real." That night, I wrote back. Just one sentence. "I'm not available to help with this." I hit send and turned off my phone. The fallout came quickly. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. Postmarked from Connecticut. It was from Grace. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream stationery, her cursive flowing like polished ice. "Elena, I won't pretend we've always been perfect. I know I've said things I shouldn't have, but this is your father's life's work. Surely you don't want to see it destroyed. You could help. And frankly, I expected more from you. Mom." There it was. Not a word of regret. Not even a hint of understanding. Just expectation. Just pressure. Just the same old playbook. And for the first time in my entire adult life, I didn't feel the urge to respond. Because now I knew my silence was not weakness. It was power. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, brunches with friends, and a short weekend retreat up in Napa. I was surrounded by people who saw me, celebrated me, relied on me not out of obligation, but out of mutual respect. It was there, among the vineyards and soft laughter, that I realized something. I didn't miss them. I missed the idea of a family that never existed. The fantasy that if I just tried hard enough, stayed loyal enough, loved deep enough, they would change. But they would not. And now I no longer needed them to. When I returned to San Francisco, I received one final message. From Ethan. "I don't blame you. Honestly, I envy you. You got out." That surprised me. Because if there was anyone who had always been comfortably tangled in our parents' world, it was Ethan. But maybe even golden children get tired of being gold-plated. I didn't reply. Instead, I printed that message and pinned it to the corkboard in my office, next to a photo of my speaking engagement and a sticky note that read, "You matter, even when they pretend you don't." The irony? In trying to remind me of my place, my mother had finally pushed me out of the cage I had been too polite to leave. And now, as their world unraveled, I was standing, free, clear, and stronger than ever. No longer chasing seats at their table, because I had built my own. And there was plenty of room for people who truly saw me. 2 weeks passed without another word from them. No calls. No letters. No emergency updates. I had returned to the comfort of quiet mornings and slow-building joy. The sun had begun lingering longer in the evenings, and my life felt like it was finally expanding instead of closing in. Then one evening I got an email. This time from Ethan. Subject: Family brunch, important. The body was short, almost formal. "Hey Elena, I know things haven't been great between everyone, but Mom's putting together a small brunch next weekend. She said she'd really like you to come. It's just us, no extended family. She wants to clear the air. I think it might be worth attending." I stared at the screen, rereading it 3 times. Clear the air? That same air she once filled with dismissiveness and poison? Something inside me curled. A defensive instinct. But there was another part of me, the part that still wanted to know why. Not for closure. Not for her redemption. But to hear it. Aloud. with my own ears. I forwarded the email to Sabrina, adding nothing. She replied almost instantly. Do it, but only if you are ready. And go in knowing you owe them nothing. I thought about it for a few days. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew this time I would not walk in meekly. If I was going to sit at that table again, it would be as a woman who knew her worth, not someone silently begging to be loved. So I said yes. The flight to Connecticut was uneventful, but my thoughts were not. I spent the entire trip crafting and uncrafting what I might say. Would I confront them? Would I simply observe? Would they pretend like nothing had ever happened? By the time the car pulled up to the old Morgan house, I had settled on one rule. I would not explain myself. The house hadn't changed. White shutters. Brick pathway. The same manicured hedges my mother paid a gardener too much to trim into perfect spirals. It looked like a postcard of a lie. I rang the bell and was surprised when Ethan opened the door himself. He looked tired. Still handsome, still confident, but older than I remembered. Like the weight of holding it all together had finally caught up to him. Elena, he said with a smile, pulling me into a brief hug. I'm really glad you came. I nodded but said nothing. Inside, the dining room was set up just like always, linen tablecloths, floral centerpieces, and my mother's favorite china. Charlotte was already seated, scrolling through her phone with one hand and sipping water with the other. She glanced up, then offered a dry, "Hey." I took the seat farthest from my mother's usual spot. I wasn't here to reenact the past. And then she appeared. Grace Morgan, dressed in her signature soft pastels, pearls at her neck, lips painted a careful mauve. She looked calm, even kind. "Welcome home, darling," she said softly. I flinched at the word. "I'm here for brunch," I replied. "Not nostalgia." She smiled tightly. Fair enough. The meal was simple, quiche, fruit, muffins. The small talk was painful. Ethan recapped his latest surgery. Charlotte complained about airline lounges. My mother asked me how the weather was in that part of California. I almost laughed. It wasn't until the plates were cleared and we all sipped lukewarm tea that she finally said it. I wanted to apologize. My eyes lifted from my cup. She folded her hands. What I said at brunch? I know it hurt you. I said nothing. She continued. It was careless and unkind. And I think I said it because, well, I was angry that you pulled away, that you built something on your own. Ethan and Charlotte shifted awkwardly. I think, she said slowly, I was jealous of your freedom, of how you didn't need us the way we all needed you. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Grace Morgan, admitting jealousy?
She went on.
I've always been proud of you, Elena. I just didn't know how to show it. I leaned back, staring at her. You told me not to think I mattered, I said quietly. She flinched. I know. You didn't forget it. You meant it. Her eyes shimmered. I wanted you to feel small because I didn't know how to handle the fact that you were already bigger than I ever was. The room fell into silence. Even Charlotte looked stunned. It was not the apology I expected. It was not perfect.
But it was real.
And for the first time, I saw something unfamiliar in my mother's expression.
Fear.
Not fear of me, but fear of having finally lost control. I nodded. Thank you, I said. That's the first honest thing you've said to me in years. She looked down. I'm trying. I can see that, I said. But I'm not here to rebuild something broken. I'm here to say goodbye to it. Charlotte scoffed. Oh, please. You think you're the only one who ever felt overlooked. I turned to her, calm but steady.
No.
But I'm the only one who stopped pretending it was okay. Ethan cleared his throat. We've all made mistakes. I nodded again. And I'm not here to punish you for them. I don't belong at this table anymore. I stood up. My mother rose too. So that's it. Yes, I said. That's it. I came. I listened. I heard your words. But I'm not the same woman who sat here 3 months ago hoping to be seen. I grabbed my coat and walked toward the door. At the threshold, I turned back. And for the record, Mom? She looked up. I do matter. I flew back to San Francisco that same night. No tears. No dramatic goodbyes. Just a carry-on, a quiet mind, and a strange sense of relief humming through my chest. I thought seeing them again might unravel me, that hearing my mother finally admit her cruelty would bring closure or ignite something too heavy to carry. But instead, I felt steady, like a door had been closed from both sides. And this time it would stay shut. The city welcomed me home with cool breeze and twinkling lights. As my Uber coasted down the familiar hills, I stared out the window and realized I was smiling. I had said what needed to be said. I had heard what I needed to hear. And most importantly, I had walked away without needing anything more. The next morning, I unpacked, made a cup of coffee, and sat on my balcony wrapped in a blanket. My phone sat beside me, silent and still. For the first time in months, I didn't dread its ring. I had no desire to check for messages. I wasn't waiting for a reply, an apology, or a last-minute plea. My life was no longer tied to them. The following week at work was busier than usual. A new client had just signed a massive estate transition plan, and I was overseeing the strategy. Late nights became normal again, but this time, it wasn't draining. It was exhilarating. Every decision was mine to make. Every win felt earned. No one diminished my voice. No one rolled their eyes when I spoke. One night, after closing out a particularly complex negotiation, I grabbed dinner with Sabrina, my colleague and closest friend in the city. We sat across from each other at a tiny Thai place, splitting green curry and laughter. "You seem lighter," she said, pouring more tea. Like something finally lifted. I nodded. I told my mom the truth, that I don't belong at that table anymore. Sabrina grinned. And did she handle it with grace and poise? I laughed. She tried. But I didn't go back to fix anything. I went back to confirm I wasn't crazy. And I wasn't, I said. Turns out, when you grow up thinking you have to fight for scraps, it's revolutionary to realize you can cook your own feast. Sabrina raised her glass. To feast. And never settling for crumbs again. That night, walking home through the quiet streets, I felt like I was living someone else's life. The kind I used to daydream about in my old bedroom back in Connecticut. The kind of life where I was enough. Just as I was. I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. Until 6:12 a.m. when my phone rang. I groaned, eyes still half closed, and reached for it. Grace Morgan. I stared at the screen. Let it ring once, twice. And then I answered. Elena. Her voice came through tight, trembling. It's your father. My body went still. What happened? He collapsed this morning, she said. At the house. He was rushed to St. Mary's. They think it was a heart attack. I sat upright. Is he alive? Yes, she said. Stable. But they're running more tests. They're not sure yet. My thoughts whirled. Despite everything, the idea of losing my father jolted something deep in me. I see, I said slowly. I wouldn't call, she said quickly, but he asked for you. I blinked. He did. Yes. He kept asking if you were coming. He said he wanted to talk to you. I didn't know how to respond. My father, always distant, always passive, had never asked for me before. He had followed my mother's lead, nodded through her decisions, quietly endorsed her dismissiveness. And yet he was asking now. I closed my eyes, took a breath. Okay, I said. I'll book a flight. The hospital in Connecticut smelled like sterile regret and cold coffee. I walked down the long hallway, heels clicking quietly, passing nurses who gave me tired, polite nods. When I reached the room, the door was slightly ajar. Inside, my father lay in a hospital bed, tubes snaking from his arms, machines softly beeping. He looked smaller, paler, human. When he saw me, something in his face cracked. Elena, he said softly. I walked in, pulled up a chair, and sat beside him. He reached out with one shaky hand. I hesitated, then took it. I'm sorry, he said. Those words, spoken in that quiet, raspy voice, hit harder than I expected. For what? I asked. For standing by, he said. For letting your mother steer the ship while I watched you disappear. I looked at him. You could have spoken up. I know, he whispered. But I didn't know how to challenge her. She was always the one with fire. I was just trying to keep peace. By abandoning your daughter? I asked. By staying quiet while she treated me like a burden? He closed his eyes. I failed you. I sat in silence. He opened his eyes again. But you didn't fail yourself. You got out. You built something. And I'm proud of you. It was the first time I had ever heard those words from him. They didn't undo everything, but they mattered. I stayed for an hour. We talked about my job, the city, small memories I thought he had forgotten. When I finally stood to leave, he squeezed my hand. Don't come back for us, he said. Live your life. I nodded. I planned to. I walked out of that hospital knowing something had shifted. Not reconciliation. Not healing. But acknowledgement. And sometimes that's the most anyone can give. I returned to San Francisco with a strange, quiet ache that clung to my bones. Not grief exactly, but the echo of something unfinished. My father had survived the heart attack. He was recovering slowly. And while our conversation in the hospital hadn't undone years of silence, it had softened something inside me.
He had seen me.
At last. Not with grandeur or tears, but with truth. That mattered more than I expected. But the story with my mother wasn't over. She hadn't been in the room that day. Claimed she was making arrangements, and too upset to sit through the tension. I saw through it. She didn't want to witness a moment she couldn't control. And 2 days after I landed home, she called again. Elena, she began, in that rehearsed, clipped tone she used when trying to sound casual. I wanted to thank you for being there, for your father. I said nothing, letting her fill the silence.
She did.
I've been thinking, she said. With everything that's happened, I realize we may have made some mistakes. I know you've carved out a new life for yourself, but I want to ask you something.
Still, I didn't speak.
Would you consider coming back, temporarily? She continued. There's a position opening at the Morgan Foundation. It's leadership level. You'd have full autonomy over the financial direction, and, well, it's time we made space for you. I blinked, letting her words settle like dust. Space for me? I repeated slowly. Yes, she said quickly. I think the board and your father would welcome you. And I do, too. The Morgan Foundation was their prized nonprofit, used more for tax advantages and social prestige than real impact. But I had always admired its potential. I'd even pitched ideas years ago to modernize it. Ideas that were brushed off by my mother with a laugh and the phrase, "Let your brother handle the big stuff, darling." And now, here she was, offering me the very position she once said I wasn't made for. I asked, why now? Her pause was longer than I expected. Because we need someone capable. Someone we can trust. You mean someone who's not in headlines, under investigation, or an Instagram influencer? Elena. No, really, I said calmly. You've ignored me for years.
Discarded me.
Told me I didn't matter. And now, because the house is burning, I'm suddenly the fire marshal? That's not fair, she snapped. I admitted I was wrong. You admitted you were jealous, I corrected. You never apologized for diminishing me. A beat of silence. You're right, she said. I didn't. And I don't expect you to forget it. But I'm asking, as your mother, consider this a chance to make something of what we've built. To turn it into something real. Something lasting. Isn't that what you've always wanted? She was good. I'll give her that. She knew exactly which words to choose. Legacy. Autonomy. A seat at the table. Only this time, I wasn't the same daughter she once manipulated with crumbs of approval. I'll think about it, I said flatly. Good, she said, almost relieved. We'll talk soon. That weekend, I took a trip up the coast with Sabrina. We stayed in a quiet lodge overlooking the cliffs, drinking tea, reading books, and letting the Pacific crash against the rocks below like a hymn of clarity. On our last night, we sat by the fireplace, the smell of cedar thick in the air. I got offered a role at the Morgan Foundation, I said casually. Sabrina raised an eyebrow. That's a curveball. I nodded. It's everything I once wanted. Influence, leadership, even a little validation. But it's also everything I've walked away from, I said. The need to prove myself. To earn a seat at their table. She leaned back. So, ask yourself, do you want the position? Or do you just want them to regret not giving it to you sooner? That hit like a cold wind. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about my younger self. The girl who stayed up late researching grant models and restructuring proposals just to be laughed off. The woman who sat at brunch after brunch, smiling through erasure. What would she want? The answer came quietly. Freedom. The kind that didn't ask her to re-enter a burning house, just because they handed her a hose this time. The next morning, I wrote my reply. Dear Mother, thank you for the offer. It's generous, and under different circumstances, I might have considered it. But I've built something of my own. Something that doesn't require me to ask for space or permission. I hope the foundation finds someone worthy. But that person will not be me. Warmly, Elena. I didn't wait for a reply. Because I didn't need one. Back at work, I walked into my Monday morning meeting like a woman untethered. My team had no idea what had transpired. To them, I was just their leader.
Steady. Clear.
Moving forward. And that, I realized, was the life I had always craved. Not being invited in, but building the place myself. 3 weeks after declining my mother's offer, I received a handwritten card in the mail. Not from my family, not from a colleague, from a woman named Andrea Keller, founder of a social impact fund in New York that focused on supporting underrepresented women in finance. I had met her briefly at the Women's Summit in Manhattan months ago, the one that started this whole chain reaction. She had approached me after my speech, taken my hand and said, "You speak like someone who's been ignored too long." That kind of voice can shake rooms. At the time, I had smiled, said thank you, and assumed I would never hear from her again.
But here she was.
Writing. Elena, I've been following your work from afar. Quietly, respectfully. And I wanted you to know that I see you. I see your clarity, your strength, the way you navigate power without stepping on others to reach it. That is rare. If you're open to it, I'd like to invite you to join the Women's Equity Network as an advisory board member. We could use your mind and your story. With admiration, Andrea. I read the card 3 times before setting it down, heart racing. Not because of the position, but because of the way she said, "I see you." That was all I had ever wanted. To be seen not for being agreeable, or useful, or silent, but for being whole. I accepted, of course. The following week, I attended my first virtual board meeting. The faces on the screen were powerful and kind, executives, thought leaders, founders, and yet the energy was welcoming, collaborative. In that space, I did not have to justify my place. I belonged. After the meeting, I stayed on the call to chat with Andrea. She asked how I had arrived at this chapter in my life, and I told her without naming names about the family that never saw me, about the brunch, about the long road from invisible to whole. She listened without interruption. When I finished, she smiled gently. "You know," she said, "so many brilliant women I meet come from that same silence. It's almost like we're born into it, expected to be background music in someone else's movie." I nodded. "And then one day, you realize you're the main character." "Exactly," she said. "And that realization? That's where power begins." The next few months flew by. Between my core work, the advisory board, and now speaking opportunities across the country, I found myself living a life I would have never dared to dream back in Connecticut. I met other women with the same invisible scars. We shared stories, built strategies, and created spaces where no one had to shrink. And then, one morning, I received a message that stopped me in my tracks. It was from a young woman named Clara, a junior associate at a New York firm. Her message read, "Hi, Elena. I just wanted to thank you. I watched a clip of your summit speech, and it made me feel seen. I'm the middle child in a family where no one expects much from me. I've always been quiet, but I'm not small. And seeing someone like you speak with so much calm strength, It reminded me that I don't have to be loud to matter. I can be me. Thank you for giving that permission, Clara. I sat with that message for a long time, because it wasn't just a thank you, it was a mirror. I saw myself in Clara. All those years of being included without being invited, spoken to without being heard, chosen only when things fell apart. And now, I was the voice that helped someone else escape that same cage. It hit me then, my family had built a house that kept me in shadows. But I had built the lighthouse, one that other women could see from their own distant shores. That night, I walked to the marina near my apartment, wrapped in a soft coat, watching boats sway gently in the dark water. The fog rolled in slow and thick, but the city lights still glowed. A reminder, even when things feel unclear, the light finds a way. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. Grace Morgan. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, but because I was no longer waiting for her to change. I had changed.
And that was enough.
A month later, I received a letter. Not an email, not a call, not a voicemail I could ignore. An actual, handwritten letter delivered to my office, sealed with my mother's distinctive cursive writing across the front. Elena Morgan.
Private.
I stared at it for a long time, unsure if I should open it. Part of me expected it to be a guilt trip, another attempt to pull me back in. Or worse, a polished farewell soaked in control and passive judgment. Still, I peeled the envelope open. Inside were 2 folded pages. The first was a note in my mother's familiar, precise script. Elena, if you are reading this, it means I had to stop speaking and start writing. I do not know how to say many things without sounding defensive or cold, but I will try to simply be honest. I failed you. I failed to see you,
To hear you.
to love you in the way you deserved. And when you pulled away, I called it disloyalty instead of what it truly was, self-preservation. I've watched from a distance as you've built something powerful. And I want you to know, I am proud. I may never deserve a seat at your table again, but if you ever choose to leave a chair open for me, one day, I will sit in it with quiet gratitude. Mom. I read it twice. Not because I doubted it, but because it finally sounded real. There was no manipulation in her words. No bargaining. No veiled demands. Just recognition.
Genuine. Human.
Late, but true. The second page was a printout. An invitation to an awards dinner in New York. The Women's Equity Network was honoring me as one of the voices of the year. Below, it was a short note in Andrea's handwriting. Your mother reached out and asked if she could attend. I told her the choice was yours. I sat back in my chair and exhaled. The decision felt simple on the surface. Invite her or do not. Include her or leave her out. But the truth was deeper. This was not about being nice. It was about choosing what kind of story I wanted to live from here on. Would I recreate the same walls they had once built? Or would I do what they could not, make space for someone even when they had failed? That night, I called Andrea. Let her come, I said softly. I do not know what that will mean.
But yes.
She can be there. The night of the dinner arrived like a quiet storm. I wore a midnight blue gown, simple and strong, with my hair swept into a low bun. When I stepped onto the stage under warm spotlights and soft applause, I was not nervous. I was ready. I stood behind the podium, the crowd falling into silence. I was once told I did not matter, I began. At a brunch table, by someone who should have known better. And for a long time I believed that voice. I let it shape me, shrink me, silence me, until one day, I left the table entirely. A few knowing laughs, a few tears. But here's the thing, I continued. When I left that table, I didn't go looking for another one to sit at. I built my own. And now I get to decide who sits beside me. Not based on titles or blood, but based on truth. I paused, my eyes landing on a seat near the back of the room. My mother was there, wearing black, small in posture, but looking directly at me. I'm not here because I was chosen, I said. I'm here because I chose me. And that's a decision I hope every woman in this room makes, loudly, proudly, and without apology. The crowd stood in applause. After the event, people gathered for photos and champagne, but I stepped away toward the hallway outside the ballroom. And that is where I found her, Grace Morgan, my mother, standing alone, clutching her purse, eyes wide with something like awe. "You are magnificent," she whispered. "Thank you," I replied. We stood in silence for a long moment. Not uncomfortable, not tense, just quiet. "I meant what I wrote," she said finally. "I know. I do not expect to be part of your world," she added. "You already were," I said, meeting her eyes. "As the reason I had to find my voice." She flinched, but nodded. "Fair. I'm not angry," I added. "Not anymore."
She looked surprised.
"Then what do you feel?" I smiled.
Free.
She exhaled like she had been holding her breath for years. "I hope someday you'll let me in again," she said. "I might," I said honestly. "But it will be on my terms. And it will take time." She nodded. "That's more than I deserve." I touched her arm gently. "But it's what I deserve to choose." And then, without another word, I turned and walked back into the light. Not as the daughter who needed her mother's love, but as the woman who had found her own.